The FIA thought 2026 would be the safest revolution in Formula One history. Instead, it may have just triggered the biggest internal crisis the sport has seen in years. Because after the Bahrain tests, Max Verstappen did something nobody expected. He went public. He called the new cars anti-racing. He described them as Formula E on steroids. And behind closed doors, multiple drivers are now questioning whether the FIA has hidden the real risks of these regulations. We are talking about cars reaching over 360 km per hour with less downforce. Massive speed differences when battery deployment cuts out. Active aerodynamics that can destabilize the rear of the car in a split second. An energy system so restrictive that drivers say they are no longer racing on instinct. They are executing software instructions. This is not small criticism. This is the reigning world champion openly challenging the direction of Formula One. And what he revealed in Bahrain could force emergency changes before the first race even begins. Stay with me, because what the drivers are preparing behind the scenes could reshape the entire 2026 era. And if you care about the future of this sport, subscribe now. Bahrain was supposed to be controlled. Predictable. A routine preseason test where teams hide performance and drivers give neutral answers. That is how it always works. You drive. You gather data. You smile politely. And you say, we still have work to do. Max Verstappen did not do that. He completed his run plan. Long runs. Energy deployment simulations. Override activation tests. He was quick. Consistently near the top of the timing sheets. On paper, everything looked normal. But when he removed the helmet, something was different. His body language was tight. Short answers at first. Then one question unlocked everything. What do you think of the 2026 cars? He paused. And instead of the usual diplomatic answer, he went straight for the core. These cars are anti-racing. That word matters. Anti-racing. Not difficult. Not complex. Anti-racing. He explained that you can no longer attack freely. You cannot push every lap if you feel confident. You cannot chase instinct. Because the battery management forces you into predetermined deployment windows. If you use too much energy too early, you pay later. If you defend in the wrong section, you compromise the next straight. It becomes strategic conservation at extreme speed. And here is where it gets serious. He said the car decides when you have power. Not you. That is a dramatic shift. For years, Formula One has moved toward hybrid systems. But drivers still controlled how aggressively they pushed. Now, according to Verstappen, the margin for improvisation is shrinking. Energy release is scripted. Zones are optimized by software. The steering wheel becomes less about feel, more about execution. And this is critical. Because Max built his dominance on instinct. On reacting half a second faster than anyone else. On feeling grip changes before they appear on telemetry. If that instinct advantage is neutralized by rigid deployment rules, the sport changes. But that is not the only issue he hinted at. He described the driving sensation as synthetic. That word keeps coming back. Synthetic. Meaning engineered. Manufactured. Calculated. He implied that the car's personality is less mechanical and more digital. Less raw. More managed. And when the reigning champion questions authenticity, fans start asking the same thing. But here is what most people missed. Despite his criticism, he was fast. Very fast. Which means this is not frustration from underperformance. This is philosophical resistance. He is not complaining because he is struggling. He is warning because he sees where this leads. And behind the scenes, other drivers started echoing similar concerns. At first quietly. Then more openly. The paddock atmosphere shifted. Engineers continued collecting data. Team principals avoided strong statements. But drivers began comparing notes. Energy drop-off points. Rear instability under active aero transitions. Battery depletion mid-straight. And suddenly, this was no longer just about one opinion. It was a pattern. And when patterns emerge this early in development, governing bodies get nervous. Because if the narrative hardens before the first race, it becomes almost impossible to reverse. But this is only the beginning. Because what Lewis Hamilton experienced in those same Bahrain runs adds a layer that makes Verstappen's comments look almost restrained. And that changes everything. Lewis Hamilton did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Because sometimes calm frustration is more powerful than anger. During one of the long runs in Bahrain, Hamilton experienced something that instantly caught attention inside the Ferrari garage. On the main straight, full throttle. Battery deploying. Everything feels normal. Then suddenly, the electrical boost runs out. The car loses that extra surge. And the drop in acceleration is not subtle. It is dramatic. He later described it as dangerous and frustrating. And here is why that word dangerous is not exaggeration. In 2026, energy management is more aggressive. When one car is deploying electrical power and the car ahead is harvesting energy, the speed difference can be massive. Not small. Not manageable. Massive. You could be closing at extreme speed without the usual aerodynamic cushion to stabilize the situation. Hamilton warned that this creates unpredictable closing rates on long straights. One car becomes temporarily vulnerable. Almost exposed. And the driver behind may not fully anticipate how sudden that loss of boost feels from inside the cockpit. Now imagine this in race conditions. Dirty air. Slipstream. High fuel load. Minimal margin for error. And suddenly a car in front slows more than expected because the battery window has ended. At over 350 km per hour, reaction time is microscopic. That is where concern turns into fear. But Hamilton did not stop there. He also criticized the mechanical grip. The new regulations reduce aerodynamic load significantly in certain configurations. Combine that with harder tire compounds designed to handle the electric torque, and you get something drivers are not used to. Sliding in slow corners. Rear instability. A sensation closer to a junior category than the pinnacle of motorsport. He reportedly compared the feeling to something far less refined than modern Formula One. That comparison spreads fast. Because Hamilton has experienced every generation of hybrid cars. If he says something feels like a step backward, people listen. And here is the deeper issue. When both Verstappen and Hamilton, two drivers from different philosophies, different teams, different rivalries, start aligning in criticism, it stops looking like personal preference. It starts looking structural. Max talks about instinct being removed. Hamilton talks about unpredictable speed drops and low grip. Different angles. Same direction. Concern. And this is where the internal tension rises. Because the FIA's entire narrative around 2026 is sustainability, innovation, efficiency. A new era that keeps Formula One relevant to the automotive world. But if that innovation creates racing scenarios that drivers describe as synthetic and potentially unsafe, the narrative fractures. The governing body insists adaptation will solve most of it. Teams will optimize deployment maps. Engineers will fine-tune balance. Software will smooth transitions. But drivers are not talking about minor calibration. They are questioning the core philosophy. And that is far more difficult to adjust. Because changing philosophy means admitting miscalculation. And institutions rarely do that easily. But what makes this even more explosive is what George Russell added to the conversation. Because he is not just another driver giving opinion. He represents the entire grid. And his warning shifts this from performance debate to safety confrontation. And once safety enters the discussion, everything becomes more serious. George Russell did not speak as a rival. He did not speak as a Mercedes driver. He spoke as director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association. And that changes everything. Because when Russell talks about safety, he is not defending a team. He is representing the entire grid. After his Bahrain runs, Russell focused on something most fans have not fully understood yet. Top speed. With the reduced drag philosophy of the 2026 cars, straight-line performance is extreme. Less aerodynamic resistance. More efficient power deployment. Longer full throttle phases. He described the cars as rockets. But rockets with less aerodynamic load holding them to the ground. That combination is volatile. 360 km per hour. With reduced downforce in certain configurations. And here is the problem. Downforce is not just about cornering speed. It is about stability under braking. It is about predictability when something unexpected happens. If a car loses stability at those velocities, recovery is almost impossible. Russell warned that traditional circuits may not be fully prepared for these new impact scenarios. Runoff areas were designed for different aerodynamic characteristics, different deceleration profiles, different car behavior. If a low downforce car arrives at the barrier at extreme speed, the energy transfer is enormous. And that is not theoretical. It is physics. But this is where it becomes politically sensitive. Because the FIA approved these regulations. They presented them as a balanced evolution. Faster on straights. More efficient. Sustainable. But if drivers are now questioning whether safety margins are thinner than before, the governing body faces a dilemma. Do they publicly admit that further adjustments are needed? Or do they insist the simulation data already guarantees acceptable risk levels? Russell also hinted at something subtle but crucial. He mentioned the unpredictability of energy states between cars. One car fully deploying. Another harvesting. One effectively accelerating harder. Another temporarily exposed. On circuits like Monza or Baku, where straight-line speed dominates, that speed differential could be amplified. And when you combine that with hard tires that are difficult to warm up, grip becomes inconsistent in early laps. Cold tires, extreme top speed, reduced downforce, energy deployment gaps. You start to see why the drivers are uneasy. But the deeper tension is this: safety concerns are not easily dismissed. When performance complaints surface, officials can argue adaptation. When safety concerns surface, the conversation shifts. Because no governing body wants to appear indifferent to risk. Especially not in Formula One. And here is the strategic dimension. If the Grand Prix Drivers Association drafts a formal communication requesting adjustments before the first race, it puts the FIA in a public spotlight. Ignore it, and you look dismissive. Accept it, and you acknowledge that the original framework may have flaws. Either way, the narrative changes. But perhaps the most unsettling part is what Russell implied without saying directly. The cars are extremely fast in a straight line, but potentially less forgiving everywhere else. Speed is seductive. It looks spectacular. But control is what defines safety. And if that balance tilts too far toward raw velocity, history reminds us how quickly optimism can turn into regret. Now imagine this pressure building behind closed doors. Verstappen challenging authenticity. Hamilton warning about dangerous speed differentials. Russell raising structural safety questions. And then Fernando Alonso steps in. Not with emotion, but with cold analysis. And what he revealed about how the racing itself could unfold might be even more controversial than the safety debate.